Welcome everyone to Dropkick DiSKussions presented by Sportskeeda. I'm your host Korey Gunz along with Sportskeeda's wrestling expert Tom Colohue. We are live and in living color this week, and among our topics on this episode will be Jeff Hardy's new deal, the role of Retribution on Raw, and much more. But Tom, I want to start with Braun Strowman, fresh off of his big storyline with The Fiend over on Smackdown and then his match at SummerSlam where he drops the title. He shows up on Raw Underground this past Monday. And first thing I got to ask you is, we're in this age of sometimes there's roster shakeups, sometimes there's not, sometimes there's a draft, sometimes there's not. So in the case of Braun Strowman, are we going to see a reciprocating move over on the SmackDown side where there's essentially a trade of talent here? Or are we just kind of rolling with it that, hey, Braun's on Raw Underground now, and we're just moving forward?
Well, the whole trade system broke down pretty quickly, and I think we'll touch a bit more on that later. But we've had, Styles moving for Ziggler and Rude. We had Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross moving, and then Apollo Crews moving, and there were people coming from NXT, but nobody going down to NXT. We had Shayna Baszler come up for no trade. So the whole thing's broken down pretty sharply. At the moment, Braun Strowman is still a SmackDown guy. I have reached out and have had that confirmed. And Raw Underground is just being used as sort of a special non-brand arena right now. It's very possible come the draft he would be moved, but at the moment it's another case of the company not really having anything for someone right now, and Shane McMahon having plenty of room to help someone out, much like he's done with Shayna Baszler in the past.
Now, we saw at the end of his segment, he ran roughshod over a couple of guys, and then he ended up being confronted by Dabba-Kato, and Shane McMahon kind of hype that up at the end that that's what we're going to see this next week on Raw will be, I guess, a match or a fight between these two guys. What do you think about the matchup between putting him in there with Dabba? Do you think it's going to do more for Braun? Will it do more for Dabba? How do you see this kind of shaking out on Monday?
I think nobody really loses out in the way they've got it set up. Raw Underground doesn't necessarily have the same impact it does. There is an anything can go format. There's a lot of people who get involved. You get matches that don't really finish because people are thrown to the outside. So as furious as I was with Shane McMahon for stopping that match from happening when it clearly was what it was building to, I'm excited to see it. I don't think they've pushed Dabba-Kato to anywhere near Braun's level, but it's Raw Underground. He has home field advantage. It should be an absolute demolition job, but I don't know, they booked Dabba-Kato pretty well. He's looked dominant at all times. He got involved with Owens and Black last week, and that's clearly what this was pushing to. Raw Underground, though, as much as anything here, it's found its footing. It's really found a place in Raw. And when they first debuted it, it looked like it was a ridiculous thing that wouldn't last even a week. And yet here we are, and it's genuinely become one of the most popular segments every week. What I will say is, though, is that they've already recorded the match, because obviously Raw Underground is always pre-recorded, and with Braun already there, they just recorded the match while they could.
Now, with Braun, at least for the time being, moving over to Raw Underground, it kind of leaves his storyline with The Fiend and Alexa Bliss, kind of that carryover from SummerSlam, kind of dangling in the air a little bit. We've talked about on the show before that was an angle that, at least for me personally, I really wanted to see some resolution to, and then it kind of got thrown to the wayside for the sake of Roman Reigns coming back. So with this move of Braun moving over to Raw for now, is this just a situation where he wasn't really needed for whatever resolution they have planned for The Fiend and Alexa Bliss? And that's, of course, assuming that there is a resolution planned for The Fiend and Alexa Bliss. So was he just not needed for furthering that storyline on SmackDown?
Well, the Roman return did surprise quite a few people. It was being discussed, but it didn't actually get confirmed until very late on. So they sort of threw a storyline out of the way, as it were. When it came to Alexa Bliss, there's a reason she wasn't featured at SummerSlam, for example. There's a reason she wasn't featured at Payback beyond looking at the TV screen. And it was because Roman Reigns had returned, and a lot of things changed. Braun, unfortunately, is someone who will suffer because Roman Reigns is there now, because otherwise he would probably continue his feud with The Fiend. What I will say as regards Fiend and Alexa, Braun's played his part now. He got Bliss and The Fiend together, and that's what he was there to do. From here on out, they're looking for ways to use him outside of that, or if they can't find one, it's the dreaded creative hiatus. Essentially being told creative has nothing for you right now. There are a few people on SmackDown he could still work with, if you ask me. I'd really like to see him in a feud with Big E, but it depends how much time they have, what their current plans are for Big E. And of course, if Braun Strowman does come back to SmackDown, who's he getting pushed over? Are we getting less Matt Riddle time? Are we getting less Jey Uso time? So it's a balancing act, but for right now, Braun Strowman is out of the title picture and he's not needed for the Fiend and Alexa storyline.
Braun's a really interesting kind of case study for me. It's part of the reason why I wanted to start off the show talking about him, because when you look at his year 2020 to date, he started off with the Intercontinental Championship run, but even at that point, a lot of people were probably thinking he'd lost a little bit of steam. They never put him over in any of those matches the year before with Brock Lesnar, never really pulled the trigger on him as far as, taking the WWE Championship. So even with the IC title, it seemed like, we're kind of running out of ideas of what to do with this guy. Then he basically just falls into the situation at WrestleMania of not only facing Goldberg, but taking the Universal Championship, has a decent run, has the angle with The Fiend. And then now here we are again, Roman Reigns kind of rears his head again. So that angle with The Fiend kind of, like we talked about, kind of pushes him to the side a little bit. He's over on Raw Underground. I got to admit, for me, I hate the look that he has now. I hate the army fatigue kind of style he's got going with the t-shirt and all. I'm just not a fan of the look that he's got. And so for me, I look at him as a guy, and I want to ask your opinion on this, is he a guy where maybe the window has already closed for him as far as being the guy, as far as being the face of a brand or being a long-running Universal or WWE champion? Has his window in that aspect, kind of his window of opportunity, already closed?
I would say no. When it comes to Braun, a lot of those matches with Brock Lesnar, people did just think it's too early. But those matches happened to try and put him over in defeat, try and make him a big deal. You look back to the Survivor Series match when he choked out Triple H, and Triple H looked genuinely terrified. A lot of people have always been fans of Braun Strowman, but right now I think more people than ever before are very big fans of Braun Strowman. The WWE are very happy with how his first title run went. They very much just wanted to essentially dip his toe in the water, and they're very impressed with the way he stepped up in the last moment to essentially strap the entire blue brand on his back. We didn't have Bray Wyatt being that heavily featured. Roman Reigns wasn't there. Sami Zayn wasn't there. Daniel Bryan and AJ Styles were, well, to be fair, AJ Styles was still on Raw at the time. So Daniel Bryan was essentially the only top star left when Braun Strowman became the champion. He had to carry the whole damn thing. Right now, he's got a lot of people on his side. By some accounts, more people than ever before. And I think we will see him be a champion again. When it comes to the idea that he may never be the top star of a brand, I don't think he will. But I don't think that's on him. I think it's a case of Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, Randy Orton, John Cena occasionally returning, Bray Wyatt as it is at the moment, Becky Lynch, Charlotte Flair. There are a lot of people right now who are potential top stars. And what it means is it's very, very hard, harder than ever before, for someone quite new and fresh to break into that group. As long as Roman's there, he will always be the top dog.
You think Braun would be better utilized more so as, an attraction, kind of in the vein of like a big show where you maybe don't see him every week, but when he does, because of his size and his stature, and maybe even like an environment like Raw Underground, where maybe we don't see him every single week, but when he does step up to fight, we know it's a big deal. It's going to be a monster type of confrontation, a demolition match, like you just mentioned. Would WWE maybe be better served to use him more in that role as opposed to an everyday superstar that has 50-50 booking, and he wins some, he loses some, and is just kind of a normal run-of-the-mill type guy like everybody else on the roster?
2020 has been a year of experimentation with Braun, with a lot of different storylines, a lot of different ways of doing things. He started off as the absolute monster against Shinsuke. And in addition to that, we had so many people working against him in handicap matches. We had Cesaro, Nakamura, and Sami Zayn working against him in order to get that championship away from the guy. So they started off with that sort of monster element. Then they brought him a little bit back down to face Bray Wyatt. And that was more of the entertainment sideshow sort of match where it was more storytelling. Then they had the swamp fight. We had everything with Miz and Morrison where it was more comedy. Now he's moving into Raw Underground after everything with Alexa where it was more intense. We've seen 5 or 6 different versions of Braun Strowman this year alone. I think as much as anything, Raw Underground this week was another period of experimentation. See if he thrives in that format. If he does, we'll see more of it. But right now, when they do so many little character changes like that, it tends to suggest they're really not sure what to do with him. I do think they could do that special attraction, but I don't think he has many ideal end game opponents if that's the case.
Let's move on and talk about Jeff Hardy. I know a guy that's near and dear to your heart, or maybe near and dear to your ears, maybe a better better exclamation. But he's a guy that reportedly has signed a new deal with the WWE. I think I've made Tom sick. Sorry about that. Sorry, Tom. He's apparently signed a new deal with the WWE reportedly. So let's just start right there. What can you tell us? Any confirmation that you can maybe give us that he has or has not signed a new deal with the WWE at this point?
Well, the deal isn't formally confirmed by the WWE. Jeff personally alluded to it in an interview, but I've put some feelers out and unfortunately no information has come through yet. There was clearly a moment in the last few weeks where they abandoned his storyline with Sheamus to put him straight into the Intercontinental title picture. That seems like more than just a coincidence to me. It was a sea change. They had started with the painted face, which was closer to the Willow character. Now he's talking about bringing back No More Words, the theme song, and that was apparently part of his decision. So they are clearly doing something to try and get the guy more happy and more involved. And a large part of that apparently was just getting out of the Sheamus storyline.
Yeah, leave it to a guy like Jeff Hardy to base his decision on what company to sign with on what theme song he can use. If you let me use No More Words, and I'll re-up with you. If not, I'm going to move on. I mean, only Jeff Hardy would be a guy that would base his decision on something like that, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. It won't be the only thing. There has been a protracted period of negotiation. We've been talking about it here. This has been going on for a long time, and it happens with a lot of different people as well. It's why AJ Styles took a while to sign his new contract, why Daniel Bryan took a while to sign his new contract. There are so many things, and especially right now, if you sign a contract for 200 dates, but you only work for one brand and work one show a week, it is not possible to fulfill that contract. So what, all those dates are moved to the next year? Right now is a really awkward time to actually negotiate a contract, and it's making it very difficult, and that includes making it difficult for someone like Brock Lesnar.
Now, you mentioned kind of the abrupt nature that we've seen kind of a storyline shift with Jeff, that he was in that storyline with Sheamus, and then kind of all of a sudden he wins the Intercontinental Championship. And like you said, maybe that's not a coincidence when he wins the title, and then there's word of that maybe he signed a new contract. But we talked in the months past when he started that storyline with Sheamus about, and I think you especially, not really a huge fan of, using the personal demons and the battles with alcoholism and drugs as the basis for the storyline. And it seemed like it's just old hat with Jeff Hardy that if you don't have any other ideas for him, use the addiction storyline. Yeah. So, but we talked about on the show that obviously that storyline's not going to go forward without Jeff Hardy's approval, and that he maybe saw it as a positive that, hey, he can bring to light, this issue and kind of make it a hero story of overcoming those demons and coming out on the other end. Now, though, that this shift in storyline kind of coincides with the fact that maybe he signed a new contract, to you, does that indicate that maybe he wasn't so cool with the addiction alcohol storyline, and so they're like, hey, okay, we'll take you out of there if you re-sign, we're going to pull you out of that and find something better for you?
Jeff Hardy's very much a company man. If he's told to do a storyline, he'll do a storyline. If he's told to pass out because he's dehydrated, then he will pass out because he's dehydrated, even though that potentially is a jab at his own brother. He sees it as simply doing his job. He does what he is told. If he is told, can you jump off that? He will say absolutely, how many times and how many misses. We talked about this extensively. If he was fine with it, then I'm fine with the storyline happening, but I still think it's lazy storytelling because of how many times they've been back to that well. This does certainly raise a question as to how okay with it he actually was, because they wrote it off completely. The important thing for me with that storyline was that he came out on top. And he kind of didn't. Even though he got a win in a bar fight, he lost. He magically had his face painted, and then he won by diving off something. That's not really a clean win, is it? I mean, it could have been a clean win, but then magic happened. So I'm not there for that personally. But it looked like the storyline was going to keep going. The two cut promos on each other in the build-up. It looked like we were going to keep going, and then suddenly things changed. My initial assumption was, okay, Sami Zayn's back at this point. I had been talking about Sami Zayn returning in the weeks leading up to SummerSlam. I nearly said Sami Slam there, which I have no issue with, given that it's Sami Zayn I'm talking about. Maybe that's the next KO Mania, Sami Slam.
There you go.
But for me, when it comes to Jeff now, the changes that they've made, I still don't see him retaining the IC Championship. I think Sami Zayn will take it and potentially go into a longer-term feud with the two. But this has definitely had a knock-on effect. Him signing a new contract has definitely affected, for example, AJ Styles, Matt Riddle, a lot of knock-on effect. So Jeff will have gone in there saying, I want this, this, and this. The WWE would have gone in there saying, no, 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 yes. And here we are.
Last thing before we move on from Jeff Hardy, if he has indeed re-signed with WWE, how surprised are you about his desire, or maybe the lack thereof, of his desire to want to just pack up and go to AEW with his brother Matt?
I wasn't aware that there was any particular desire to go to AEW. I do know that Jeff is very rarely far apart from his brother, though. I think if Matt had gone back to Impact, Jeff would have potentially gone back to Impact as well, rather than AEW. It's not often that they're separate. I am going to wait to see how long the contract is for Jeff Hardy. If it's 2-3 years, I could see him potentially still wrestling in AEW in the future. If it's a 5-year contract, which the WWE have been trying to get people to sign for a while now, they are trying to get people to sign long-term contracts, then this may be the last contract that Jeff Hardy signs.
I'd have to imagine. So, I mean, 5 years for Jeff Hardy with all the wear and tear on that body of his. I mean, I couldn't imagine him lasting, at least as a full-time competitor. I mean, another 5 years. I mean, seriously, I mean, if he was on the road on a full schedule, I couldn't see him lasting another 5 years.
The man takes just a lot of bumps, a lot of really nasty, unnecessary bumps. And that's what's made him a star. But I wish he'd stop. I wish he'd look after himself a little bit more. But I think wherever he goes, he would still have the same style. I think if he went to AEW, he'd be jumping off much higher things than his brother did.
Yeah, let's not think about that. We saw how that turned out for Matt last time, so let's not entertain that. Let's move back over to Raw now. Talk about some interesting developments that we saw on the show. Most notably, Retribution makes their presence known again on the show. But the biggest thing to me was the fact that, and I loved the aspect that they ended up brawling with the Hurt Business at the end of the show, and the Hurt Business, a heel stable, doesn't run, doesn't tuck tail and hide. They go right after Retribution, and they end the show with a brawl. To me, and I'm a fan, and we've talked on the show, I'm a fan of the Hurt Business. I love the whole look. I love that they come out in suits and are ready to fight. I mean, I just love everything they've done, and we've talked about the credit that MVP probably deserves for all of this coming together the way that it has. But to me, it was so refreshing to see a heel group come out and take the fight to another heel group, at least we're led to believe is a heel group. I just thought it was just so refreshing to see them in that role and not take the cowardly heel way out of things. What did you think about the way that Raw ended this past Monday?
I really enjoyed Raw overall. I felt for the in-your-face edition, they put together a very good show. I don't know how well it will compete with football. I'm not in America to really gauge the sporting audience over there. But I think they did everything they really could do with the tag match, with the women's title match, with the cage match. And in fact, with this particular final spot, they built up McIntyre and Lee just heavily. And even though Keith Lee's got a bit of a losing record already, he was able to really show an intensity. This then leads to Retribution being involved. They could have promo earlier in the night. Kevin Owens was able to win a match due to some dodgy light bulb action. And Retribution really haven't been established as good guys or bad guys, right, which is only helped by the fact that you now have a heel group coming down to attack them. Now, don't get me wrong, though. As rare as it is, and as happy as it makes me, it is consistent for the Retribution's message to be people who come down, beat the hell out of people, but get paid. And it does mean now that they can hold up Adam Pearce for as much money as they want because they're the ones there clearing out Retribution. No one else is doing it. It also raises the possibility, of course, that MVP might himself be involved somehow, because even though there was a brawl there, we've seen plenty of brawling with Cedric Alexander and MVP, and yet they're on the same team now. So this certainly could have been something to leverage an extortion racket out of the WWE.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting thread throughout the night that, Retribution, they brawl with the Hurt Business, who are heels. They cost essentially Aleister Black a match with Kevin Owens. So when you look at it in that aspect, it's almost as if they were functioning as the baby faces. They were helping the baby faces out. They were going against the heels. What do you think of the idea of maybe leaving Retribution as, quote unquote, tweeners for the time being? Like, to your point, where they just come out and run roughshod on everybody and they don't really have a defined role as of yet? Or do you think it's better that before the big unmasking that they do have a defined side of the roster that they're on?
I think this is very typical of WWE booking. When a new NXT talent is called up, they don't immediately say, cheer for this person, boo this person. That was the case with Rusev. They fought him a few different people on different sides of it before then going heel. That was the case with Asuka. She was simply an unbeatable badass when she came up. There was no face-heel dynamic about her. And it wasn't until essentially pairing up with Kairi Sane that she actually definitively had a side to be on. And I think that's the case with Keith Lee so far. They haven't said whether he's a good guy going up against Drew McIntyre or a bad guy going up against Randy Orton because he's been involved with both. I think this is the case with Retribution. I would like to see them decide what alignment they have, but at the same time, it really depends who is in that group. Yes, we've seen the names. This week it was Shane Thorne alongside the usual, which is Dominik Dijakovic, Mia Yim, Mercedes Martinez, and Dio Madden. They had more people, as I've been reporting for a while on the preview shows, that when they will be adding more people to Retribution and using them. I don't know if all of these people are going to feature, but I know there is at least going to be that core 5 or 6. Until we know who they are and their motivation, we can't really look at them as face or heel, which adds to the mystery and, for me, keeps them interesting.
Let's move on now to the steel cage match that we saw on Raw between Seth Rollins and Dominic Mysterio. Not so much the match itself, but maybe more so the aftermath, which is at least maybe not the official breakup, but definitely some tensions building between Seth Rollins and Buddy Murphy. You would assume that at some point we're going to get the final big explosion between these two and get a feud. And I wanted to ask you, Buddy Murphy's a guy that, started off in the cruiserweight, 205 Live and kind of worked his way up and was a guy that people wanted to see kind of get his break on the main roster per se, instead of just being limited to being a cruiserweight. And we talked about the role that Seth Rollins has had with this group that's not really a group anymore for a variety of reasons. But when he first started this Monday Night Messiah, he had guys like the AOP. He brought up Buddy Murphy. He had Austin Theory for a couple of weeks. Are these guys that Seth Rollins is personally a fan of and wants to try to get them over? And is he doing the same thing for Buddy Murphy here? Is he a hand-picked opponent that Seth Rollins says, I want that guy, and I want to feud with that guy, and I want to make this guy?
Buddy and Seth have been friends for a little while now, and when the initial idea was pitched of having them work together, they were both very excited for it, and they've been involved in their storylines quite a lot since. I'm a big fan of Buddy Murphy. I feel if he was in New Japan, he'd potentially be winning a G1 very soon, just because of his style and what he can deliver, and I feel that the pace of his matches really suit that. Same can be said of Seth Rollins. Buddy Murphy's name was on the list of names that Seth was offered for SummerSlam, saying, who do you want to wrestle at SummerSlam? Buddy Murphy's name was on there. There was also a bit of tension just before SummerSlam in case they decided to go that way. Samoa Joe's name also on there. But when it comes to what Seth is doing, he is really working right now to develop a lot of people. At this stage of his career, he's very much alongside Randy Orton as a top guy on Raw and alongside Roman Reigns as the top guys in the company, and he's determined to develop the next generation. he made AOP, for me at least, and Austin Theory much more relevant in storyline terms. He's done that with Buddy Murphy as well, who after his feud with Aleister Black, a lot of people were worried about what was going to happen next. But he immediately was thrust into this with Seth Rollins, and he's been on TV every week since. He's been in some very big matches. Basically, everyone who has been under Seth Rollins' tutelage or in matches with him has grown massively, outside, of course, of Rey Mysterio, who's already a veteran. So yeah, Seth really wants to work with everyone involved here, and he has handpicked quite a few people, including the match with Dominic. He handpicked that one out of a list of potential matches. Seth wants to get people over, and I think Buddy Murphy might be his greatest triumph yet.
Now, Seth Rollins has obviously been involved with the Mysterio family going on 4 or 5 months now. I mean, it's been a pretty prolonged feud between going from Rey and then now specifically, solely with Dominic. But interestingly enough, Road Warrior Animal, of all people, had a little bit of criticism for the way that Dominic has been booked in this feud. Road Warrior Animal, if you don't know, works with us here at Sportskeeda. He does a Raw review show. If you haven't checked that out, you can look up on our Sportskeeda.com and their YouTube channel and find that. But on this past week's review, he mentioned that he was not a fan of the way that they had booked Dominic. He thought that, for one, he was losing too much, that he was only fighting Seth Rollins, and obviously because of Rollins' position in the company, he was going to lose those matches, which, makes sense. But he was also not a fan of the fact that they put him in a steel cage match on free TV on Raw. He said that should be, a pay-per-view match or a blow-off, and that's something that maybe Dominic really isn't even ready for in the first place. Obviously, Animal, much more of an old-school kind of guy, but do you agree with some of his critiques here? What are your thoughts on the way that they've handled Dominic Mysterio and his feud with Seth Rollins up to this point?
In the last few years, TV deals have essentially meant that TV is what's making the money, and pay-per-views, as we've seen, have been more commercials for TV than anything else recently. Now, Road Warrior Animal does offer a real inside perspective. The information that he has and the opinions that he have come from a place of real experience. Personally, looking on the outside, I think Dominic's been booked absolutely perfectly. But I do recommend people check out Legion of Raw after every installment of Monday Night Raw on the Sportskeeda Facebook and YouTube. Pretty much, I think it's about 15 minutes after Raw, it goes live every single week.
Let's move on to another kind of weird incident that we saw on Raw, which was the finish to the Asuka-Mickie James match. I said it was a weird finish. I don't really have any other word that I can use for it. I mean, it was kind of just abruptly in the middle of the match. It looks like they're transitioning into some type of move, or Asuka's going to get a submission on Mickie James, and then the referee calls for the bell, and you can even see on Mickie James' face that she is just as surprised as anybody that the referee's called for the bell and has ended this match. What can you tell us about this finish? Obviously, something went awry here. So what can you tell us as far as this finish between Asuka and Mickie James and kind of what went down on Monday?
Well, firstly, there was a rumor that Mickie James had picked up a shoulder injury, but her own website has made it clear that she's absolutely fine, and this was a refereeing mistake. Now, looking at the match as we go through it, Asuka used the Asuka lock, but didn't get the arm like she usually does, which does seem to indicate there may have been a shoulder problem. That caused some confusion, and the referee has called it ahead of the intended finish. Mickie James had rolled into a pinning situation, but it wasn't a clean roll, and after not having the grip on the arm as well, essentially, Mickie James's selling was so effective that the referee called for the bell to end the match. It is a refereeing mistake. It's a real shame. Mickie James wasn't happy, but these things do happen. There are times when you do have that miscommunication. It may have been the referee saying, we need to stop the match, or it may have been someone backstage in the referee's ear saying, we need to stop the match. Either way, Mickie James and Asuka very surprised that the match ended when it did. And Zelina Vega told essentially, oh, get out there, get out there.
Yeah, with Zelina, I was going to touch on her as well. Looks like she may be in line for a little bit of a push. Comes out and confronts Asuka and slaps her across the face. And Zelina's a lady that we haven't really seen in the ring that much. So to kind of throw her to the wolves and put her right up against the Raw Women's Champion seems like a little bit of a surprise, I guess, maybe a little bit of a rush. But what did you think? If Zelina is in fact the next challenger for Asuka, what's your opinion on that, and how do you see that going for her, especially in the ring against someone like Asuka?
Well, I'm very, very excited for the match. One of the main reasons, if you watch the YouTube channel of Zelina Vega and Aleister Black, they show some of the training that they've been doing. And Zelina Vega can hang with Asuka. Absolutely, she can. Some of the chain wrestling, the submission wrestling, the MMA fighting style that Zelina Vega has, this should be a really genuinely thrilling match. I've got to say as well, Zelina Vega's a great storyteller. You look at her time in the Battle Royal at WWE Evolution. You look at her in the Royal Rumble when she was hiding under the ring. She's a great storyteller and she adds a lot of comedic elements, but she can also really go. So I'm very excited for the match. I don't think she's going to win. I think this is essentially a bit of fan service of people who've been trying desperately to make this match happen for so long. I'm one of them. I really want to see this match happen, see what they can do. And Zelina Vega is one of those. She's such a good talker, and she can go straight back to managing Andrade, managing Angel Garza, potentially managing Aleister Black, who's now currently available, and they have made some tweaks to his character recently that could lead to that. So she could be able to regain her heat very quickly, or she could end up in alongside the Monday Night Messiah. She could end up in the Hurt Business. She can find a way to get her heat back, but I'm just excited to have the match.
Yeah, I hate Aleister Black's pants. He doesn't need tweaks.
You're not the first person who told me that.
Right. I mean, I feel like I've talked about him. I talked about Braun. I feel like I'm being a little bit, I'm being pretty nitpicky on the wrestling gear side, but that's just me. I hated the pants. I don't know why they did that, but.
Well, to be fair, it's right here on this podcast. We initially broke the news that there was going to be some changes coming to Aleister Black's character. I remember that was clarified a bit later by other wrestling journalists, and here we are seeing it literally unveiled before our eyes.
Or one eye in the case of Aleister.
Or one eye in the case of Aleister.
Let's talk about something else. We mentioned trades at the beginning of the show with Braun Strowman. Another roster move, trade, however you want to classify it, went down this past weekend. It was revealed that Mandy Rose has been sent over to Raw from SmackDown. Is this more of simply a storyline move? Her along with Otis have been involved with Miz and Morrison. So is this simply, and Miz was the one that broke the news that she was being traded. So is this just a kayfabe move over to Raw, or is something more? Is Mandy Rose somebody that Vince or somebody backstage said, hey, we need to get her over to Raw?
I think the fact that she didn't appear on Raw is very telling. She is taking a little bit of time off now after SummerSlam. I don't think that surprises anyone, and I don't think I need to explain why. What this is a SmackDown storyline. So regardless of the fact that she's on Raw, and regardless of how soon she starts appearing on Raw, this is a storyline between Otis and The Miz, and she's a pawn being used in this way in a manner that keeps her in the public eye. So it's like when Steve Austin injured his neck and he appeared on commentary every now and then. It's just a way of keeping her prominent, making sure nobody forgets who she is and she doesn't lose any momentum while she's away for a little while. What I can see happening is Otis being very, very upset with The Miz, coming to blows, going after him with the fury of 1,000 deaths and all that drama. But I really can't see them being kept apart very long. Otis and Mandy are pure chemistry, and they will be joined again sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I really hope so. I'm a fan of Otis, but I almost feel like, he's not Mr. Money in the Bank if it wasn't for Mandy Rose and that whole angle. And like you said, the chemistry they have. So I think it would be really strange if they were to just take her away from him right in the middle of, this run, after they gave him the briefcase and just kind of and split them up. So I'm really hoping that it is just storyline reasons and not something where they've decided to kind of abandon that couple. Just Tucker doesn't look quite as good on Otis's arm as Mandy Rose does, I don't think.
That's your opinion, sir.
Last thing, we'll wrap up the show with this. You mentioned Keith Lee earlier in the show, and he was a guy that we saw another attire change. I know people on social media have especially been upset with when it comes to Keith Lee's attire and music. So we saw another tweak to the attire for Keith Lee, but maybe more importantly was his backstage segment with Drew McIntyre. And we saw a little bit of a different side to Keith Lee, much more aggressive, a little bit of smack talk, getting right up in Drew's face. And you mentioned before, I thought it did a great job of hyping the match up between Drew and Keith Lee for that episode of Raw. And that's definitely a match that I would like to see again, considering the way that everything ended on Raw. What can you tell us about not only just what we saw on Monday as far as, showing that ruthless aggression, to take a term from Vince McMahon, that side of Keith Lee, but also just his position on the roster and in the company since being brought up from NXT? I mean, he was a guy that it seems recently, very rarely do we see an NXT guy get immediately thrown into the main event scene. But, I mean, they've gone full steam ahead with him. I mentioned on a past episode that he seems to be getting the Kevin Owens treatment. He got brought up, beats Randy Orton clean, and boom, here, a superstar is made. So what can you tell us about kind of his positioning in the company since being called up to Raw?
Well, there is a lot going on in that question, so if you'll bear with me while I run through quite a bit of it.
Always do that.
You
I
always do
almost
that.
made it through the show, but right here at the end.
As regards the fact that they were showing it several times over the night, if you're going to make someone wait 3 hours for a main event, you've got to show interviews. You've got to show encounters backstage. It used to be you'd have something hyped up right at the beginning of the show. That main event would be on the second hour, and then something hyped up between the first and second hour would be the main event in the last hour. So they essentially had two shows that overlapped in the middle a little bit, but that's not the case anymore. With the tweaks that they are making to Keith Lee, they have been making tweaks since he debuted. So it's not hard to see that more are going to happen. Yes, we have new attire now. We had the new music when he first came in. We had new facial hair, new characteristics, as it were. And then now only here settling into who they actually want him to be. As regards the push, it's definitely amongst the top people. But for me, he's been playing more of a spoiler role, essentially standing between Randy Orton and Drew McIntyre to keep the two of them from coming to blows too much. That's how it feels to me. Yes, this is a push, and he is being made to look like a big deal, but he's a pawn in their story for me. That's what I'm seeing here. A large part of the reason I see that is because, yes, he beat Orton and he beat Ziggler, but he lost to Orton via DQ. He lost to Orton via DQ. This match was a non-finish, and he lost a triple threat, even though he wasn't pinned. Of his 6 matches, he's actually only won 2 so far. His win record is 33%. So I'm not sure how strongly he's actually being pushed. I think maybe he will get his title shot. I think we are actually going to see a title shot for Keith Lee in the future. But if we're going to have an ambulance match, I've never seen a triple threat ambulance match. And they wouldn't have teased it if it wasn't going to happen. So I'm confident we get another match next week. Somehow Drew McIntyre comes out the winner. That leads us to McIntyre versus Orton, and Keith Lee goes down the card a little bit. We will have to wait and see what actually happens. But for me, this isn't the big push that was promised, because once this particular feud is done, he won't still be in that level. He won't still be in a position whereby, okay, well, now Drew has vanquished Orton. Now it's Keith Lee's turn. I hope he is, but I don't see it from the booking so far, because it's just constant, not clean finishes. They are protecting Orton and McIntyre way more than they are protecting Keith Lee, even though Orton did lose clean.
Do you think that's, I mentioned that when a superstar here in the past has been called up from NXT, this has kind of been the cycle we've been in. They come in, they get a big push, and then maybe they're lost in the shuffle. And like I said, I thought maybe Keith Lee would be a guy to break that cycle, but you say maybe we should pump the brakes on that, want to see a little bit more evidence of that. Do you chalk that up then to a lack of direction from the creative team? We've talked in past episodes about how chaotic, the writing for Raw has been lately. So was that just a lack of foresight from the creative team about bringing him up, or do you think that this was the role he was brought up for, and then once this Drew Orton Keith Lee thing is over, then we'll figure out the rest after that?
I think the storyline is absolutely fine. He shouldn't be winning matches constantly against his caliber of opponent, but I think fans need to get used to the concept of under-promise and over-deliver. I think there is a real heavy weight of expectation that came with that win over Randy Orton and came with his debut just a massive weight of expectation, and people are expecting that he's going to be a WWE champion by the end of next month. There is no way to win in that scenario. Kevin Owens, yes, he came up, he beat John Cena. The next thing that happened was he lost to John Cena, and the next thing that happened after that was he lost again to John Cena. Yes, they will always hype up when he debuted to beat John Cena. They won't mention the next two, but the next two still happened. This is the cycle. The first change that seems to happen for everyone whenever they're called up to main roster is Vince McMahon says, I need more edge. And what that essentially means is be angrier. And here we are with Keith Lee.
It'll be interesting to see. I feel like we could do a whole podcast episode on just NXT call-ups and kind of how they've, like you said, this cycle of, and kind of feeling like they've missed the boat on a lot of people with all this, stop-start type of booking. But we'll have to save that for another time. But we'll be interested to see how Keith Lee does moving forward and heading into Clash of Champions. Well, that'll wrap us up for this week's edition of Dropkick Discussions. We appreciate you tuning in as always. Please be sure to like and comment on our video this week and subscribe to the Sportskeeda YouTube channel if you haven't already. While you're there, you can also subscribe to Tom's personal YouTube channel for even more wrestling news and notes and videos. You can follow Tom on Twitter at Colohue. You can follow me on Twitter if you'd like at Korey Gunz. And check out Sportskeeda.com for all the latest news and articles. We thank you for joining us, and we will see you next week on the next edition of Dropkick Discussions Podcast.